we think that there is now a new threat because, of course, this attack has been claimed by Al-Qaeda. And that's why we take new measures, and we introduce the body scan for the flights towards the United States.
Well, the Dutch government announces it will beef up airport security, while here at home the finger-pointing has officially started inside the U.S. government about who was responsible for what President Obama calls a systemic failure. Let's bring in our panel. Steve Hayes of the Weekly Standard, Mort Kondracke of Roll Call, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. I assume you all saw Catherine Herridge's report at the beginning of the show. Fascinating report. The intelligence community now in full swing, pointing fingers, who knew what, when, who shared what. Was there a smoking gun? What do you make of it all, Steve?
Well, I think we will find out in the coming days, because there will be leaks and counter leaks, and you will see this kind of Washington game where one agency points fingers at the other, and we'll find out, I think, ultimately who's at the bottom of this. You know, the bigger problem from my perspective is that this is a failure of presidential leadership. More than it's a bureaucratic problem, the system didn't work. I mean, you have an administration, I think, that is totally out of sorts on this. On Sunday, they were talking about the system working. On Monday, the president said it was an isolated extremist, and on Tuesday, they were leaking that they were picking bombing targets in Yemen. That is out of control. They don't have any idea what's going on, and I think they're scrambling to find out, and they're having to scramble in public, which does exactly the opposite of what you need to do right now, which is inspire confidence.
But Mort, I mean, in fairness, that's all after the fact. Right. Is it a failure of presidential leadership that let this guy get on that plane?
You know, I don't think so, but we're going to get into the political back and forth, I guess, in the second segment, right, as to, you know, the Republicans versus the Democrats. Here we have the intelligence agencies going after one another. Clearly, we do not have a seamless Jack Bauer-style counterterrorism operation. There were systemic failures here, as the president said. It is worth remembering that there have been systemic successes. I mean, there have been a lot of terror plots that have been uncovered over the past couple of years, some during this administration, a lot during the Bush administration. Airplanes were going to get blown up over the Atlantic. That was discovered, and so on, and people arrested who were going to go after military bases. On the other hand, you know, this system needs to be improved. We still don't know who failed and how they failed in the case of the Fort Hood shooting. I mean, that was 2 months ago. We ought to be able to find out pretty soon what did we learn, what was done as a result of it that could have helped here. Clearly, this guy Al-Awlaki in Yemen is responsible for a lot of it, and the sooner he gets a predator in his front yard, the better.
I mean, let's talk about this, Charles, because it's always easy to find fault, and hindsight is 20/20. The State Department cable that Catherine Herridge got her hands on says the subject may be involved with Yemeni-based extremists. I mean, given all of the intelligence all over the world, is that a smoking gun?
It may not be yet because the event hadn't happened, but it is a high enough index of suspicion that you have to make sure it's heard in Washington. Obviously, it's not a matter of the system failing, as if it's all algorithm in a computer and there was an algorithm failure. It was humans who did not look at the information and say, oh my God, if a father walks in, it's not an embittered ex-spouse, but a father who cares about his son and says he's radicalized, he's in Yemen, he called me from Yemen. Well, that information is extremely important, and there were underlings who missed it. The larger issue of presidential leadership, I think, is this, and it starts with the Bush administration. Under pressure from the left and also their own desire to empty Guantanamo, they released a lot of Yemenis, including 2 who are now the head of Al-Qaeda in Yemen. And the Obama administration has made a fetish of closing Guantanamo. It released 6 Yemenis already this month. There are 91 remaining. And I love the way the press covers all this. It says that this event in Detroit creates complications for the further closing of Guantanamo, as if the closing of Guantanamo is an unassailable absolute good, and this is going to get in the way. What it ought to do is to cause a reconsideration of the closing of Guantanamo. You don't release these Yemenis, you keep them in detention until the war is over, and if Al-Qaeda doesn't end the war. Let them stay until the end of time in Guantanamo.
You know, there's another, and there's so many different developments and so many different strands, and I at least want to touch on this with you, Steve. Reports that al-Qaeda in Yemen has dozens more jihadis who are ready to strike the West. That's not only what U.S. intelligence says, it's also what this fellow Abdul Muttalib was saying. I mean, that's a pretty frightening prospect.
Well, it is a frightening prospect, particularly because we now know that he's basically lawyered up. He's not talking anymore. So he said this apparently in the initial stages of this, before the FBI had even the kinds of information about him and about al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula to ask these questions, and these are the important questions. But this, again, I think goes back to a failure of presidential leadership. And this is not taking partisan shots. This is not taking ideological shots. Some of this was knowable. I mean, back in January of 2009, you had the U.S. ambassador to Yemen saying that we wanted to repatriate a majority of the Yemenis in Gitmo. And not just repatriate them, but repatriate them and reintroduce them to society so that they could make a future for themselves. That's a direct quote. And the Obama administration backed him up when I asked him about it.
Well, we should, this seems like a good time as any to plug Fox News Sunday this Sunday, which I have an interest in. John Brennan, the assistant to the president for counterterrorism and homeland security, will be our guest, and obviously these are all questions to ask him. We have to take a break here, but when we come back, we will turn to the politics of national security. The finger pointing has already started, not just among the agencies, but also among politicians on both sides of the aisle as they try to turn the failed plot to their advantage. The panel takes a fair and balanced look at that next.